She thought her only chance at a future was marrying a stranger in the West. A respectable man, a cattle rancher with a sprawling homestead. That's what his letters promised. But what she found wasn't a promise. It was a prison. She found isolation, cruelty, and a dark, bloody past hidden behind her husband's cold eyes. And just when all hope seemed lost, when she was one breath away from giving up, someone who had been watching from the shadows decided it was finally time to act. The Montana Territory, 1875. The wind didn't just blow here. It screamed. It tore across the plains and clawed at the tiny train station like a hungry wolf. Elizabeth Morgan felt that same cold clawing inside her chest. She was 24 years old, her family in Boston gone, buried. All she had left was a single worn leather suitcase and a piece of paper in her pocket. An advertisement for a mail-order bride, answered out of sheer desperation. It was her only ticket out of a life that had become a dead end. The man was Walter Blackwood. His letters spoke of a good life, a solid future. It had seemed like her only option. "Last stop, Granite Creek," the conductor shouted, his voice swallowed by the gale. Granite Creek. It sounded sturdy, permanent. Elizabeth straightened her simple blue dress, trying to smooth out the wrinkles from 1,000 miles of travel. She adjusted her bonnet and peered out at the town, and her heart just sank. This wasn't a town, it was a suggestion of a town. A single muddy road flanked by a few tired-looking wooden buildings. Nothing like the bustling, noisy streets of Boston. It was the kind of quiet that gets inside your head. A tall man with a face like carved granite broke away from the shadows of the station and walked toward her. He didn't smile. His eyes weren't welcoming. They were assessing her, like a farmer checking a new piece of livestock. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice small and tentative. "Elizabeth Morgan," he stated. It wasn't a question. He knew who she was. She nodded, and he just grunted in response. "Let's go. Got work to finish before sundown." No greeting, no handshake. He didn't even offer to take her heavy suitcase. Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. She bit back the disappointment, the rising tide of fear, and followed his broad, stiff back to a wagon that looked as worn and tired as everything else in this place. The ride to his ranch was a study in silence, a heavy, uncomfortable quiet that was only broken when he barked a direction or a warning. He wasn't making conversation. He was laying down the rules of her new prison. "Town's 12 miles from the ranch," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Don't expect to visit often." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Winters are harsh. Indians mostly keep to themselves now, but some Blackfeet still cause trouble. Stay close to the property." Every word was a bar in the cage he was building around her. As they crested a low hill, she saw it. The ranch. And any last flicker of hope she'd been clinging to was extinguished. His letters had described a substantial homestead. This was a crude, two-room cabin that looked like it was one bad storm away from collapsing. A small, leaning barn stood nearby. A few cattle grazed in the distance. Tiny specks in a vast, overwhelming emptiness. The isolation was a physical thing. It pressed in on her from all sides. Walter pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down. "You'll cook, clean, mend, and help with the animals," he said, not even looking at her as he unhitched the horses. "We'll be married by the circuit preacher next month when he comes through." That was it. No talk of a life together, just a list of her duties. That night, Elizabeth lay on a narrow, lumpy cot in the corner of the main room, the sounds of the wind and Walter's heavy snoring filling the darkness. He had eaten the tasteless meal she'd prepared in silence, then retreated to his bedroom without a single word. She had traded one kind of loneliness for another, a much sharper, more terrifying kind. She clutched the small daguerreotype of her parents, her last link to a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Tears streamed down her face as she traced their smiling images. "What have I done?" she whispered into the cold, empty room. "How will I possibly survive this?" Days bled into one another in a blur of grueling, thankless work. She was up before the sun, stoking the fire and making breakfast. She worked until her hands were raw and her back ached with a pain so deep it felt like it had settled into her bones. and every night she collapsed onto her cot, utterly exhausted. Walter was a constant menacing presence. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to issue an order or to criticize her work. The biscuits were too hard. The floor wasn't clean enough. She was too slow mending his shirts. She learned he'd lost his first wife to illness 2 years ago, but he spoke of it with no emotion. It was clear he didn't see Elizabeth as a new wife, a partner. He saw her as replacement labor, and a poor one at that. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry on a line stretched between the cabin and a dead tree, she felt it. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. Her head snapped up, and she scanned the edge of the property. And then she saw him. A Native American man, sitting perfectly still on a painted horse at the tree line. He wasn't hiding, just observing. Watching the ranch. Watching her. When his eyes met hers, he didn't look away. He held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod before turning his horse and melting back into the trees. That night at supper, she made the mistake of mentioning it. "I saw a man watching the house today. An Indian." Walter's fork clattered onto his plate. His face, already a thundercloud, darkened further. "Stay away from any Indians you see," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Especially that one. That's Swift Eagle, a Blackfeet warrior. He's trouble. They're all trouble." The venom in his voice was startling. It was more than just prejudice. It was a deep, personal hatred. That night, Elizabeth lay awake, Walter's words echoing in her mind. Trouble. She thought about the man on the horse. He hadn't seemed threatening. He had seemed watchful, protective even. Little did she know, that single, silent encounter had set something in motion that would change everything. Because Swift Eagle hadn't just seen a woman hanging laundry, he'd been watching this ranch for a long time. He knew Walter Blackwood, and he had recognized in Elizabeth a caged spirit, a soul as trapped as his own people were becoming in this changing world. And he had decided he couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. The following week, Walter announced he was leaving. "Going to the Miller place to help with branding," he grunted over breakfast. "I'll be gone 3 days." He looked at her, his eyes cold and hard. Keep the rifle loaded and the doors barred at night. Then he was gone, riding away without a backward glance. For the first time since she'd arrived, Elizabeth was alone. And the feeling was a strange mix of profound relief and sharp, biting fear. The silence of the prairie was suddenly deafening. Without Walter's constant criticism and heavy presence, the cabin felt both blessedly empty and terrifyingly vast. She slept in fits and starts that night, the creak of the cabin walls and the howl of the distant coyotes making her jump at every sound. On the second day of his absence, she was in the chicken coop, collecting the few precious eggs when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, not one horse, but several, and they were coming fast. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the heavy rifle Walter had left propped against the door, her hands clumsy with fear. Was it Walter, coming back early? Or was it something else, something worse? She crept out of the coop, keeping low, the rifle held tight against her shoulder. And then she saw him. Swift Eagle. He was dismounting from his horse, his movements fluid and graceful. But he wasn't alone. 3 other warriors sat on their horses behind him, their faces impassive, their eyes scanning the property. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Walter's warning screamed in her head. Trouble. "I mean no harm," Swift Eagle said, his voice calm and clear. His English was perfect, accented but fluent, and it caught her completely off guard. "I bring a warning." He took a step closer, his hands held open and away from his body. "Your husband has enemies, bad men, coming from town. You should not be alone here." Elizabeth hesitated, the rifle still half raised. Every instinct, every warning she'd ever been given, told her not to trust him. But there was a directness in his gaze, a quiet dignity in his bearing that Walter had never, ever shown. It was the complete opposite of her husband's shifty, cruel nature. "How do you know English so well?" she asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. It was a foolish thing to ask, but it was all she could think of. A flicker of something, maybe a smile, crossed his lips. "I was educated at the mission school before I returned to my people," he said. "I know both worlds, your world and mine." He gestured toward the dusty track leading to town. "The men who dislike your husband will arrive tomorrow. They claim he stole cattle from them. It would be safer for you if you were not here when they come." This was too much, too fast. Cattle theft? Enemies? Walter had presented himself as a respectable, hard-working rancher. Was that just another lie? Before Elizabeth could even process the information, before she could form another question, Swift Eagle was turning back to his horse. "Consider what I have said," he told her, swinging himself into the saddle. "I will return tomorrow before they arrive." And with that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his warriors following close behind, leaving Elizabeth standing in the dust, clutching a rifle and a warning that had just blown her world wide open. He was the first person in Montana to show her an ounce of concern. And he was the one man her husband had ordered her to fear. Elizabeth didn't sleep that night. She sat by the cold hearth, the rifle across her lap, Swift Eagle's words chasing each other around in her head. She had no logical reason to trust him. He was a stranger, a man her husband despised. And yet, there was something in his eyes, a sincerity, a deep-seated honesty that she had never once seen in Walter's. By the time the sun started to bleed across the horizon, she had made a decision. She wasn't ready to run, not yet, but she wasn't going to be caught unprepared. She gathered her few essential belongings, the daguerreotype of her parents, a change of clothes, the small amount of money she had sewn into the hem of her dress, and wrapped them in a shawl. She pried up a loose floorboard beneath her cot and hid the small bundle in the dark space below. If trouble came, she wouldn't leave with nothing. The morning dragged on, each minute stretching into an hour. Elizabeth went about her chores on autopilot, her body moving through the familiar motions while her eyes constantly scanned the horizon. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Then, around midday, she saw it. A cloud of dust in the distance, growing steadily larger. It was coming from the direction of town. Her heart leaped into her throat. She ran back inside the cabin, her hands slick with sweat as she grabbed the rifle. She positioned herself by the small, grimy window, peering out as the riders drew closer. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men with grim faces and guns strapped to their hips. They looked like the kind of men who didn't ask questions first. They reined in their horses in a cloud of dust right in front of the cabin, their eyes sweeping over the property. The leader, a tall man with a jagged scar that cut across his cheek from his eye to his jaw, swung down from his horse. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called out, his voice rough as gravel, "we know you're in there. We just want to talk about your husband's debts." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Debts. Swift Eagle had said they accused him of stealing cattle. It was true. Her finger trembled on the rifle's trigger, but she stayed silent, hidden in the shadows of the cabin. "Your husband's been rustling cattle and skipping out on his payments," another man shouted, his voice laced with anger. "We aim to collect what's owed, one way or another." The men began to spread out, moving with a practiced, menacing purpose. One headed toward the dilapidated barn, while the other 2 approached the cabin from different angles, flanking her. Panic began to rise in her throat, hot and choking. If what they said was true, then Walter hadn't just lied about his homestead. He'd lied about everything. He was a thief. And he had left her here to face the consequences. Just as the scarred man reached for the cabin's door handle, a new sound cut through the tense silence. More hoofbeats, a lot of them, coming hard and fast from the direction of the trees. Elizabeth's head whipped around. It was Swift Eagle. He burst from the tree line, not with 3 warriors this time, but with at least a dozen, their painted horses thundering across the prairie toward the cabin. "Damn Indians!" the scarred man cursed, spinning around and drawing his pistol. His companions did the same, their attention instantly shifting from the cabin to the new, much larger threat. The warriors fanned out, forming a silent, intimidating crescent in front of the cabin, effectively trapping the 3 men. Swift Eagle rode forward slowly, raising his hand in a gesture that might have been peaceful, if not for the hard, unyielding look in his eyes. "This woman is under our protection," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. The scarred man, Jed Harker, spat on the ground. "Your quarrel is with Blackwood, not her. Stay out of white men's business, Indian." Swift Eagle's gaze was like flint. "The woman has done nothing," he replied, his voice dangerously calm. "She is new to this land. If Blackwood owes you debts, you will take it up with him when he returns, but you will not threaten her." A standoff. The air crackled with tension. Elizabeth watched from the window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Swift Eagle was risking his life, and the lives of his men, for her. A woman he didn't even know. A white woman. In that single, breathtaking moment, she made her decision. She took a deep breath, pushed the cabin door open, and stepped outside. The rifle was still in her hands, but she held it lowered, pointed at the ground. She looked directly at the debt collectors. "I knew nothing of my husband's debts," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "Or any cattle rustling. I have been here barely a month." The scarred man, Harker, studied her with narrowed, calculating eyes. "Mail-order bride?" he guessed. When she nodded, he let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Figures. Blackwood's done this before." The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. "Done this before? Gets women out here?" Harker continued, a cruel smirk on his face. "Works 'em to death, or until they run off. Then he just sends for another one." It couldn't be true. It was too monstrous. "What? What do you mean, done this before?" she stammered. One of the other men shifted uncomfortably, his gaze softening with something that looked like pity. "You're the third one in 2 years, ma'am," he said quietly. The air rushed from Elizabeth's lungs. "The third. First one died of a fever, or so he claims," the man went on. "Second one. She just disappeared last winter. Some say she tried to make it back east on her own. Never been seen since." Elizabeth felt sick to her stomach. The small, unmarked grave she had found behind the cabin. Walter had told her it was his first wife, Mary, taken by illness. But now that simple explanation seemed sinister, unbelievable. What really happened to those other women? Swift Eagle dismounted and walked to stand a respectful distance from her. "You deserve more than this life," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "My people can help you. We can take you to the fort or to the mission. You do not have to stay in this place of sorrow." For the very first time since she stepped off that train, Elizabeth felt like she had a real choice. A terrifying choice, but a choice nonetheless. Surprisingly, the debt collectors seemed to agree. "We got no quarrel with you, ma'am," Harker conceded, holstering his pistol. "But when Blackwood gets back, you tell him Jed Harker came calling, and next time, I won't be so patient." As he and his men mounted their horses, Harker turned back to her one last time. His eyes met hers, and the flicker of pity was there again. "If I were you," he said, his voice dropping, "I'd take the Indian's offer. Blackwood's got a real mean streak when he's crossed. A real mean streak." He didn't have to say anything more. Elizabeth understood the unspoken threat. The men galloped away, leaving a thick cloud of dust and an even thicker silence behind them. Elizabeth turned to Swift Eagle, her mind reeling. The questions poured out of her in a rush. "Why? Why would you do this for me? You don't know me." Swift Eagle's dark eyes were steady on hers. "I have watched this place for a long time," he replied. "I have seen how Blackwood treats the things he believes he owns. His horses, his cattle, his women. My people believe in respecting all living things. He does not." One of the other warriors spoke in their native tongue, a quick, urgent-sounding phrase. Swift Eagle nodded. "We must go," he said to Elizabeth. "Blackwood may return early if he runs into Harker's men on the road. He will be angry. He will be looking for someone to blame." He held her gaze. "Will you come with us?" She didn't even have to think about it. Staying meant facing Walter's rage, a man she now knew was a liar, a thief, and possibly much, much worse. Going meant stepping into the unknown, trusting a man she'd been taught to fear. But it was no choice at all. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I just need to gather my things." She ran back into the cabin, her hands no longer trembling. She retrieved her hidden bundle from beneath the floorboards, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth frame of her parents' photograph. When she stepped back outside into the sunlight, she felt a strange sense of lightness, of freedom, even with the uncertainty that lay ahead. Swift Eagle helped her mount behind him on his powerful horse. "The women of my tribe will welcome you," he said, as she settled herself, her hands resting hesitantly on his waist. "You can stay with us until you decide your path. No one will force you to stay. No one will force you to go." As they rode away from the miserable little cabin, Elizabeth made a conscious decision not to look back. There was nothing there for her but pain and deceit. Whatever hardships lay ahead, they could not possibly be worse than the life she was leaving behind. The setting sun was painting the vast Montana sky in breathtaking shades of orange and purple. And for the first time since arriving in this harsh, beautiful land, Elizabeth felt a genuine spark of hope ignite within her. She was riding away from a monster, and toward a future she couldn't yet see. They traveled through the deepening twilight, following faint game trails that were completely invisible to Elizabeth's eyes. The landscape, which had once seemed so empty and menacing, now felt alive, filled with secrets only Swift Eagle and his men understood. He explained that they would reach his people's current encampment by the next morning. They had moved closer to the mountains for the summer, following the traditional hunting grounds their people had used for generations. "My father is Red Wolf," Swift Eagle told her as they rode, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "He is an elder of our band. He remembers the days before so many white settlers came. He has seen much change, but he still believes in the old ways, the ways of honor and respect." A new anxiety began to creep into Elizabeth's thoughts, replacing the fear of Walter. "Will your people accept me?" she asked, her voice small against the vastness of the prairie. Swift Eagle was silent for a moment. "They will see that you are fleeing injustice," he finally replied. "That is something my people understand better than anyone." As the stars began to appear, impossibly bright in the clear, dark sky, they made camp in a sheltered hollow. The other warriors took up positions around the perimeter, their watchfulness a silent comfort. Swift Eagle built a small, efficient fire that gave off heat but almost no smoke. Elizabeth watched him, marveling at the contrast between him and Walter. Where Walter was crude and careless, Swift Eagle was precise and thoughtful. Where Walter was harsh, he was gentle. He handed her a thick buffalo robe to ward off the night chill. Wrapped in its warmth, Elizabeth gazed up at the Milky Way, a brilliant, shimmering river of stars splashed across the heavens. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a sense of peace settled over her. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever new challenges she would have to face, tonight she was safe. Tonight, she was free. The first light of dawn spilled across the plains in shades of gold, and rose as Elizabeth awoke. For a dizzying moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The warning, the debt collectors, the escape. She had fled. She had chosen the terrifying unknown over the certain misery of life with Walter. Swift Eagle and the other warriors were already awake, preparing to continue their journey with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice. "We will reach my people's camp by midday," Swift Eagle informed her, offering her a piece of dried meat and a handful of tart, flavorful berries. "The women will have questions for you. Answer them honestly, but do not be afraid." Their journey took them into increasingly rugged terrain, climbing into the foothills of the mountains where tall pines and slender aspens grew in dense stands. The air grew cooler, cleaner. Elizabeth found herself studying Swift Eagle as he rode ahead of her, his back straight and strong. She watched the way his dark hair was tied back with a simple leather thong, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, missing nothing. He was nothing like the wild, dangerous savage Walter had described. He was a man of quiet dignity and immense strength. "There," Swift Eagle said at last, his voice breaking the silence. He pointed ahead, to a valley nestled between two large hills. Smoke from several campfires rose in thin gray columns against the deep blue of the sky. My people's summer camp. As they drew closer, she could see the encampment more clearly. About 20 teepees, made of tanned buffalo hides, were arranged in a large circle. Horses grazed peacefully in a nearby meadow, and the sounds of children laughing and dogs barking drifted up to them on the breeze. It was a scene of peaceful, communal life. But as they rode into the camp, all activity ceased. The laughter of the children died away. Curious faces, young and old, turned in their direction. A white woman, riding with their warriors. It was a sight no one had expected. An older man emerged from the largest teepee, the one in the center of the circle. His long hair was streaked with gray, and his face was a roadmap of deep lines. But his posture was straight and proud, and he carried an air of undeniable authority. Red Wolf, Swift Eagle's father. He walked forward to meet them as Swift Eagle dismounted and helped Elizabeth down from the horse. Swift Eagle spoke to his father in their own language, a series of low, guttural sounds that flowed like water over stones. He gestured toward Elizabeth as he spoke. She stood as straight as she could, pulling on a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed, acutely aware of every single pair of eyes in the camp fixed upon her. Finally, Red Wolf turned his piercing gaze on her. He took a few steps closer, studying her face intently. "My son says you fled a man who treated you without honor," he said. His English was halting, but clear enough. "Is this true?" Elizabeth met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I came to this territory to marry him, but he deceived me, and I have learned he has done the same to other women before me." Red Wolf's expression didn't change. "Why should we risk helping you?" he asked, his voice stern. "Your husband is a white man. He may bring trouble to our people. He may bring soldiers." It was a fair question. "I ask only for temporary shelter," Elizabeth replied, choosing her words carefully. "Just until I can find a way to the fort or the mission. I have no claim on your help, but I am deeply grateful for what your son has already done." The old elder's weathered face seemed to soften, just slightly. "My son sees something in you worth protecting," he said, his eyes flicking to Swift Eagle and back to her. "For now, this is enough." He gestured toward a woman who had been standing nearby, watching them with quiet curiosity. "Morning Dove will show you where you may rest." Morning Dove was a few years older than Elizabeth, with a kind, gentle face and intelligent eyes. She approached with a cautious but friendly smile. "Come," she said simply, and led Elizabeth toward one of the smaller teepees on the edge of the circle. Inside, the space was larger than it looked from the outside, and surprisingly cozy. Morning Dove offered her a simple dress of soft, supple deerskin and a bowl of fresh water to wash away the dust of her journey. "Swift Eagle told us about you in his message," Morning Dove explained, as Elizabeth gratefully washed her face and hands. Her English was as good as Swift Eagle's. "I was taught at the mission school, too." Elizabeth paused, confused. "Message? When did he send a message?" A knowing smile touched Morning Dove's lips. "Last night, while you slept," she said. "Our people have ways of communicating across long distances." She didn't explain any further, instead showing Elizabeth how to arrange a comfortable sleeping place on a pile of soft furs. But Elizabeth's mind was racing. Swift Eagle had sent a message ahead of them. He had known, even before they arrived, that she would be accepted. He had planned for her safety in ways she hadn't even realized. The thought was both humbling and deeply comforting. This man, who owed her nothing, was thinking steps ahead to protect her. Over the next several days, Elizabeth was cautiously but kindly welcomed into the daily rhythms of the Blackfeet camp. The women taught her which berries were safe to eat, how to scrape a hide clean, and how to grind corn into meal. They included her in their work, and their quiet acceptance was a soothing balm on her bruised spirit. The children, who had at first been shy and wary, slowly warmed up to her, their natural curiosity overcoming their initial suspicion. They would approach her in small groups, asking her questions about her strange clothes and the faraway city she came from. Swift Eagle was often away from the camp, leading hunting parties or scouting the surrounding territory. But when he was there, he made a point to spend time with her. He would explain the meaning behind the symbols painted on the teepees, tell her the stories of his people, and explain their deep connection to the land. Elizabeth found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she would have admitted, drawn to his thoughtful intelligence and his quiet, unshakable strength. "Your people have endured so much hardship," she observed one evening as they sat by the communal fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. Swift Eagle nodded, his expression somber. "The white man's expansion has changed everything. Our hunting grounds shrink every year. Many of my people have died from new diseases or from fighting to protect our lands. The rest are being forced onto reservations." His jaw tightened. "Some bands still resist, but it is a fight we cannot win, not against the soldiers' guns." "And yet you learned their language," Elizabeth noted. "You went to their schools." "I believed that understanding the white man's ways was the only way to protect my people," he explained. "I learned to read their books, to speak their language, even to pray to their God. But in the end, I returned to my people. Because this," he gestured to the camp around them, "this is where I belong." He turned his intense gaze on her. "And you, Elizabeth Morgan? Where do you belong now?" The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know anymore," she confessed. The words barely a whisper. "Everything I thought my life would be. It's all gone." She had no home, no family, no future she could see. She was adrift. On the 7th day of her stay, a young warrior came galloping into camp, his horse lathered in sweat. He spoke rapidly to Red Wolf, his words urgent and clipped. The elder's face grew grave. Swift Eagle joined them, and Elizabeth saw his whole body tense as he listened. A few moments later, he walked over to where she was standing, his face a grim mask. "Blackwood has returned to his ranch," he said, his voice low and tight. "He found you were missing." Her blood ran cold. "He is in Granite Creek right now, gathering men to search for you. He is telling everyone that you were kidnapped by Blackfeet warriors." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He wasn't just coming for her. He was using her disappearance as an excuse to bring violence to these people who had shown her nothing but kindness. "He'll bring trouble to your people," she whispered, horror-struck. "Yes," Swift Eagle acknowledged, his eyes hard as stone. "And if he convinces the soldiers at the fort that his wife was taken by force, they will become involved. They will send a patrol." Red Wolf joined them, his face stern and unyielding. "You must leave our camp," he said, his words falling like stones. "Not because we fear Blackwood, but because we cannot risk the soldiers coming here. We have children. We have elders. We will not put them in danger for one person." Elizabeth felt the tears welling in her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry. "I understand," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have shown me a kindness I can never repay. I will go immediately." "Not alone," Swift Eagle said, his voice firm, cutting through her despair. He shook his head. "I will take you to the mission near Fort Benton. The sisters there will protect you. They can arrange for passage back east, if that is what you wish." A storm of conflicting emotions washed over Elizabeth. Relief that she would not have to face the wilderness alone. A deep, aching sadness at the thought of leaving this community, the first place she had felt safe in months. And something else. Something deeper and more confusing that she felt for the man standing before her, a feeling she wasn't ready to put a name to. They left before dusk, riding double on Swift Eagle's strongest horse, a powerful bay that moved with tireless grace. The mission was a 3-day journey to the northeast. They would have to travel fast, and they would have to be careful. As the Blackfeet camp disappeared behind a ridge, Elizabeth felt a profound sense of loss. This place had been a sanctuary. These people had been her saviors. "Thank you," she said softly, her words almost lost in the rush of the wind as they rode. "For everything." Swift Eagle nodded, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "The journey ahead will not be easy," he said. "But you have already shown great courage. Few white women would have chosen to leave everything they knew to escape a bad husband." "I didn't have much choice," Elizabeth admitted, thinking of the grim stories of the women who came before her. "Not after what I learned." "There is always a choice," Swift Eagle countered, his voice firm. "Many people choose to accept their suffering rather than face the unknown. You chose differently." That night, they made a small, hidden camp in a sheltered ravine. As the stars blazed to life overhead, Elizabeth found herself consumed with worry about the future. What would she do? Go back east, to a life of poverty and loneliness? Or try to stay in this vast, untamed territory, with no money, no family, and no one to rely on? The questions spun in her mind, a dizzying whirlwind of uncertainty. "You are troubled," Swift Eagle observed, his voice pulling her from her thoughts. He handed her a steaming cup of tea he had made from wild mint leaves. "I'm thinking about what happens after I reach the mission," she confessed. "I have no one, no money, and no husband, however poor a match he was." Swift Eagle was silent for a long moment, staring into the flickering flames of their small fire. "Perhaps the path will become clear only when you reach it," he said at last. Then, his voice softer, he added, "Not all white men are like Blackwood. There are good settlements, good people. A woman with your courage could find a place for herself." Elizabeth studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of some deeper emotion there, a warmth that went beyond just concern. But then he turned away, his expression once again unreadable. Something was happening between them, an unspoken connection, a bond forged in shared danger and mutual respect, was growing in the space between their two very different worlds. But what place could such a fragile thing possibly have in either of their lives? As she drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped once again in the warmth of the buffalo robe, Elizabeth had a startling realization. She no longer thought of Boston as home. Somehow, in the vast wild expanses of the Montana Territory, surrounded by people she had been taught to fear, she had begun to find a new version of herself, a woman who was stronger, braver, and more resilient than she had ever imagined she could be. The journey to the mission stretched into a fourth day. They were forced to make a wide detour to avoid a party of riders that Swift Eagle, with his keen eyes, identified as a posse from Granite Creek, likely searching for her. Walter was making good on his threat. The news sent a fresh jolt of fear through Elizabeth, but it also hardened her resolve. She was not just running from a bad marriage anymore. She was running from a man who would see innocent people harmed to satisfy his own bruised pride. They started traveling mostly at night, resting during the day in hidden alcoves and dense thickets that Swift Eagle knew from his years of hunting and roaming these lands. During those long, quiet hours of hiding and waiting, they talked. Really talked. Elizabeth told him about her childhood in Boston, about her parents, and the influenza that had taken them both, leaving her utterly alone. She spoke of the desperation that had driven her to answer Walter's advertisement, the fragile hope she had carried with her on the long train ride west. In turn, Swift Eagle spoke of his own life, a story of two worlds in collision. He told her about his time at the mission school, the struggle to reconcile the white man's teachings with the traditions of his people. The missionaries taught that their God was the only true one, that our ways were savage and wrong, he explained, his voice low and tinged with old pain as they rested beneath a rocky overhang, hidden from the midday sun. "But my people have always known that the Creator speaks in many voices. We see the sacred in the flight of an eagle, in the strength of the mountains, in the turning of the seasons." "I was raised to believe in one God, one church," Elizabeth admitted, her voice thoughtful. "But since coming west, I've begun to wonder if my understanding was too small. There is something sacred in these lands, something powerful that my church back east never spoke of." A rare, genuine smile touched Swift Eagle's lips, transforming his usually solemn features. "Now," he said softly, "you are beginning to see with new eyes." By sunset on the fourth day, they crested a high ridge. In the distance, nestled in a curve of the Missouri River, they could see the faint outline of Fort Benton. On a nearby hill, the white-painted chapel of the mission gleamed in the last light of the setting sun. They were almost there. "We will reach it by morning," Swift Eagle said, his voice strangely flat. "But I cannot go any closer. The soldiers at the fort, they are suspicious of any Blackfeet warrior, especially now with Blackwood spreading his lies." Elizabeth felt a sudden, sharp pang of sadness. This was it, then, the end of their journey together. "This is where we must part," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Swift Eagle nodded, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "There is a stream ahead. We can make our final camp there. Tomorrow, at dawn, you will continue alone. It is not far." That night, their last together, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. The comfortable silence of their previous nights was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Elizabeth found herself trying to memorize everything about him. The way the firelight caught the sharp planes of his face, the low, steady cadence of his voice, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. She knew, with a certainty that ached in her chest, that she would never see him again. "What will you do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as they sat on opposite sides of the small fire. "Will you go back to your people?" "For now," he replied, his gaze fixed on the flames. "But things are changing quickly. The government pushes more of our people onto the reservations every year. Soon, the old ways of life, the freedom to roam these lands, it may all be gone." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said, the words feeling hopelessly small and inadequate. What could she, a lone woman with nothing, possibly say to comfort a man who was watching his entire world disappear? Swift Eagle was silent for a long time. Then he looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "Each person must find their way in the world that exists," he said, his voice quiet but intense, "not the one they wish existed." He held her gaze. "You have taught me this. You faced the reality of your life with Blackwood, and you chose a different path." "Only because you showed me it was possible," she responded, her voice thick with emotion. "I would still be in that cabin, a prisoner, if not for you." As the fire burned down to glowing embers, Swift Eagle reached for a small leather pouch tied to his belt. It was beautifully made, adorned with intricate beadwork. "I want you to have this," he said, holding it out to her. "My mother made it before she passed to the spirit world. Inside is a stone from our sacred mountains. It is said to give clarity and strength to the one who carries it." Elizabeth reached out with a trembling hand and took the pouch. The leather was incredibly soft. "I can't take this," she whispered. "It's too precious." "You must," he insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "To remind you of your own strength, especially when you doubt yourself." His fingers brushed against hers as she took the pouch, and a jolt like lightning shot through her. "And perhaps," he added, his voice dropping even lower, "to remember the one who recognized that strength in you." In that moment, everything unspoken between them seemed to crystallize in the space between their hands. A connection, deep and powerful, that defied the logic of their separate worlds. In another time, another place, perhaps something beautiful might have grown between them. But they both knew the harsh realities of the world they lived in. The prejudices, the dangers, the near impossibility of bridging the chasm that separated a white woman from a Blackfeet warrior. "I will never forget you, Swift Eagle," Elizabeth whispered, tears finally overflowing and tracing hot paths down her cheeks. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, his touch both comforting and heartbreaking. "Nor I you, Elizabeth Morgan." Dawn arrived too soon, painting the eastern sky in pale shades of gray and pink. A mist rose from the valley below, shrouding the world in a soft, ethereal light. Swift Eagle helped her prepare for the final leg of her journey, giving her a small bundle of food and a water skin. The sisters at the mission are kind women, he assured her. Tell them your husband was cruel. They have helped other women in your situation before. They will help you. As she prepared to leave, he pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. I wrote this for you, he said. Do not read it until you are safely at the mission. Their farewell was brief, almost clinical. Both of them knew that lingering would only make the inevitable parting more painful. He had acquired a horse for her during their travels, and now he helped her mount. May the Creator watch over your path, he said, his voice formal, distant. And yours, she replied, her own voice choked with unshed tears. With one last long look at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, Elizabeth turned her horse and rode toward the mission, the small leather pouch clutched tightly in her hand, a warm, solid presence against her heart. The sisters at St. Peter's Mission welcomed her with a kindness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Mother Agnes, the elderly nun in charge, listened to Elizabeth's story with a compassionate ear, her expression showing no shock or judgment. You are not the first mail-order bride to seek sanctuary within these walls, my child, she said, her voice gentle but firm. God does not expect a woman to endure cruelty and abuse, whatever some men might claim. They gave her a small, clean room, a simple meal, and a chance to rest. That evening, alone for the first time in days, Elizabeth finally opened the letter from Swift Eagle. His handwriting, a relic of his mission school education, was precise and elegant. Elizabeth, it began. By the time you read these words, I will be returning to my people. But I could not leave without telling you that meeting you has changed me. You showed a courage I have rarely seen, breaking free from a man who saw you only as property. My people have a saying, the eagle does not hunt for flies. It means one should focus on what is truly important, what is worthy of their spirit. You, Elizabeth, are an eagle who refused to live as though you were meant for smaller things. I have taken the liberty of arranging something for you. A friend of mine, a trader named Thomas Jenkins, lives in Helena. He is a good and fair man. He owns a small newspaper and is in need of someone who can write clearly and keep his accounts. I have told him of your education in Boston. If this path interests you, show this letter to Mother Agnes. She knows Mr. Jenkins well and can arrange for your passage. Whatever you choose, know that somewhere on these vast plains, a man remembers your courage and your spirit. You deserve more than what Blackwood offered you. You deserve to soar. Swift Eagle. The letter fell from her trembling hands. Tears, not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming gratitude, streamed down her face. He hadn't just rescued her from Walter's cruelty. He hadn't just led her to safety. He had thought about her future, planned for it, and given her a tangible path forward. He had given her a chance to build a life of her own. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth stepped off the stagecoach in Helena, a bustling mining town far more substantial than Granite Creek. A kind-faced man in his 50s, with spectacles perched on his nose, stepped forward to greet her. Miss Morgan, I'm Thomas Jenkins. He smiled warmly. Any friend of Swift Eagle is a friend of mine. That man saved my life during a blizzard 3 winters ago. I'm more than happy to return the favor. The newspaper office was a chaotic but exciting place, filled with the smell of ink and the clatter of the printing press. Elizabeth, with her neat handwriting, her quick mind, and her tireless work ethic, quickly proved herself invaluable. Mr. Jenkins gave her a small, comfortable room above the office and paid her a fair wage. For the first time, she was earning her own money, making her own way. Over the months that followed, Elizabeth blossomed. She built a new life in Helena, a life that was entirely her own. She made friends, joined a small church congregation, and even began to write small articles for the newspaper, unsigned at first, then later under the pen name E. M. Freeman, a quiet, personal acknowledgement of her journey to independence. Occasionally, traders passing through town would bring news from the territories. She learned that Walter Blackwood's lies and crimes had eventually caught up with him. Jed Harker and the other ranchers he had cheated had pressed their case, and with evidence of his cattle rustling mounting, the law had finally stepped in. He was arrested, tried, and sent to the territorial prison. His ranch was seized and sold to pay off his many debts. Justice had been served. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a year after she had first arrived in Helena, Elizabeth was working late, finishing the layout for the next day's paper. The front door opened, and Mr. Jenkins came in, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Elizabeth," he said, "there's someone here to see you." He stepped aside, and her heart stopped. Standing in the doorway was Swift Eagle. He was dressed in a curious but dignified blend of traditional Blackfeet clothing and a simple white man's shirt and trousers. For a long moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. The sight of him, here, in her new life, was something she had dreamed of, but never dared to hope for. He looked around the busy office, at the stacks of paper, at the ink on her fingers, and a slow smile spread across his face. "You have found your wings," he said simply. "Because you showed me I had them," she replied, her voice soft as she rose from her desk. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small room. "My people have been moved to the new reservation, north of here," he told her. "The government has appointed me as a liaison to speak for my people with the Indian Agency. My duties will bring me to Helena regularly." His dark eyes held a question, a hope that mirrored her own. Elizabeth felt her heart, which she thought had stopped, begin to race with a wild, joyful rhythm. "I would like that very much," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I would like to see you whenever you visit." The smile that transformed his face was the one she remembered from their nights by the fire, a rare and beautiful thing. "The world is changing, Elizabeth Morgan," he said. "Perhaps in these changing times, new paths can be found that were not possible before." Elizabeth's hand instinctively went to her collar, her fingers touching the small, soft leather pouch she still wore, always, beneath her dress. "I believe they can," she answered, returning his smile, her heart soaring higher than she ever thought possible. They both knew the challenges they would face, the prejudices, the whispers, the sheer difficulty of bridging their two worlds. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had found something rare and precious in each other, a connection forged in the heart of the wild Montana territory. And it was something worth fighting for. As they walked out of the newspaper office and into the bustling streets of Helena that evening, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them, Elizabeth knew that her long, arduous journey west had not been a mistake. It had brought her exactly where she was meant to be. Not to a life of servitude on a desolate ranch, but to this unexpected path, this unimaginable freedom, and this incredible chance at happiness with the man who had seen her true worth from the very beginning. The small stone in the pouch seemed to warm against her skin, a constant reminder of Swift Eagle's words, "You deserve to soar." And now, finally, Elizabeth believed it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of survival and unexpected justice. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what you think Elizabeth's future with Swift Eagle will hold. Thanks for watching.